Hey everyone, and welcome! Today we're diving into what might be one of the most misunderstood books in the entire Bible, Leviticus. Specifically, we're tackling chapters 13 through 18. Now, I get it. You hear Leviticus, and you might think of a super dense list of rules about skin diseases and ancient rituals, right? But stick with me here, because what we're about to unpack is actually a brilliant blueprint for how an ancient, imperfect people could live side by side with a perfectly holy God. It's a really fascinating journey, so let's get into it.
So here's our game plan for today. We're going to start by looking at how ancient Israel diagnosed what they called uncleanness in chapter 13. Then, we'll explore these beautiful, symbolic ceremonies for restoration in chapter 14. From there, we'll talk about everyday purity, the huge climax of the Day of Atonement, why blood was considered so sacred, and wrap it all up with a powerful call to holy living. You'll see it's a journey from separation all the way back to community, from defilement to holiness. And you know, all of these laws, all these rituals and ceremonies, they are all designed to answer one single profound question that drives absolutely everything we're about to see. How could a totally holy, pure, life-giving God live right in the middle of a camp full of messy, imperfect human beings without destroying them? Leviticus gives us the answer, and honestly, it's pretty amazing.
Okay, so our journey starts here in chapter 13. Look, before you can build a holy community, you've got to set some boundaries. You have to identify and separate anything that could threaten the purity of the camp, where God's very presence is dwelling. So this chapter gives this incredibly detailed guide for identifying ritual uncleanness, starting with contagious skin diseases, which you'll often see translated as leprosy. Now, the process here is just fascinating. This was no snap judgment. The priests, who were the descendants of Aaron, basically acted like public health officials. First, they'd do an initial examination of a sore or a strange spot on the skin. If they weren't sure, they'd put the person in quarantine for 7 days. Then came a second examination, and only after this really careful, methodical process would they finally make the call, clean or unclean. It was designed to be fair, not just based on fear.
And what's really interesting is that this principle of containing a contagion wasn't just about people. The text applies the exact same logic to their belongings. So if a piece of clothing had a strange greenish or reddish stain, what the text calls a corrosive sore, it had to be inspected. Even houses that showed signs of spreading mildew were put under investigation. The whole living space of a community had to be protected to keep it ritually pure.
And the consequence of being declared unclean? Wow, it was severe. This wasn't just a medical diagnosis, it was a huge social and spiritual reality. The person literally had to live outside the camp, completely cut off from their family, their friends, their community, and, most importantly, from the tabernacle, the very symbol of God's presence. It was like a living death, a very real, tangible picture of what separation felt like. But here's the good news. If chapter 13 was all about separation, chapter 14 is all about the joyful path back home. It lays out these intricate, beautiful ceremonies for someone who has been healed, showing that there was always a way to be welcomed back into the community and back to God. The whole process started outside the camp with this incredibly powerful ritual involving 2 birds. So one bird was sacrificed and its blood was mixed with fresh, living water. That mixture was then sprinkled on the person 7 times, symbolizing their cleansing from the death of their condition. Then, the second living bird was dipped into that same blood and set free, flying away into an open field. Just a beautiful, living picture of that person's own release from isolation and their return to life. So after re-entering the camp, the final steps of restoration got really personal. The priest would take blood from a sacrifice and later some oil, and he would touch the person's right earlobe, right thumb, and right big toe. I mean, think about the symbolism there. Your hearing, what you listen to, your hands, what you do, your feet, where you walk, every single part of your life was being reconsecrated, rededicated to living a holy life in God's community. And this is so important. This pathway back was open to everyone. The law made very specific provisions for the poor. If someone couldn't afford the 3 lambs required for their final offerings, they could bring 1 lamb and a couple of turtle doves or pigeons instead. This shows us a core principle. Access to God and restoration to the community was never ever meant to depend on how much money you had. Okay, so we've gone from these dramatic diseases and healings, and now chapter 15 kind of shifts our focus. It moves to the more routine, everyday situations that also needed attention to maintain that state of ritual purity. And this isn't about sin. It's about recognizing the sacredness of the human body and the powerful forces of life. This chapter deals with different kinds of bodily discharges. Now, it's really important to get this. In the ancient world, this wasn't about being shameful or unhygienic in the way we think about it today. It was more that any fluid connected to the life-giving potential of the body was seen as incredibly powerful and, well, sacred. So coming into contact with that life force outside of its proper context made a person ritually unclean, meaning they were temporarily unfit to enter the holy space of the tabernacle.
And this verse right here, this is the ultimate why. Why all these rules? It was all about protection. God's presence is often described as this intense, consuming fire of pure holiness. So bringing impurity, even the unintentional, ritual kind, into that presence was dangerous, maybe even fatal. These laws were basically a gracious warning system, teaching the people to be mindful of holiness so they could live safely with God right there among them.
And that brings us to what is, for real, the absolute pinnacle of the book of Leviticus. Chapter 16, the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. This was the one day of the entire year when all the accumulated sin and uncleanness of the whole nation was dealt with in one massive, solemn ceremony.
So to really get this chapter, we have to understand this key term, atonement. This isn't just about saying you're sorry. In the biblical sense, it's an active process of making things right. It involves covering sin, cleansing what's been defiled, and purging impurity, so that the relationship between God and His people can be restored and kept healthy.
On this single day, the high priest, Aaron, had to perform a series of unique, incredibly holy tasks. He and he alone would go beyond the veil into the most holy place, the Holy of Holies. Shielded by a cloud of incense, he would sprinkle the blood from a sacrifice on the mercy seat, that's the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, to make atonement. Then he'd come back out, lay his hands on a live goat, confess all the sins of Israel over it, and then that goat would be sent far away into the wilderness.
The symbolism here with these two goats is so deep. One goat was chosen for the Lord, and it was sacrificed. Its blood was used to cleanse the tabernacle itself from all the pollution caused by the people's sin. But the other goat, the famous scapegoat, wasn't killed. Instead, all the sins of the nation were symbolically placed on it, and it was led far away, literally carrying their guilt right out of the community. So together, they show two sides of atonement, purification and removal.
So if blood is so central to this whole idea of atonement, what makes it so special? Well, chapter 17 gets right to the point, laying down the core principle behind every single sacrifice we've talked about. This verse right here is the theological anchor for the entire sacrificial system. Blood was sacred for one simple reason. It represented life itself. God says, the life of the flesh is in the blood. And since God is the author of life, He's the only one who can say what its purpose is. And He says that He has given the blood to the people on the altar as the way to make atonement. It's a gift, a provision for reconciliation. And this core idea led to two really crucial laws for the community. First, all animal sacrifices had to be brought to the one central altar at the tabernacle. This was huge because it stopped people from engaging in pagan practices and it unified the nation's worship of the one true God. And second, because blood represented life and was set apart for atonement, the people were strictly forbidden from eating it. It was a constant reminder to respect the sanctity of life.
Okay, this brings us to our final section, and this is where the book makes a massive pivot. After dealing with all this ritual purity, chapter 18 makes it crystal clear that holiness isn't just about rituals and sacrifices, it's about moral and ethical purity, woven into the very fabric of daily life.
God sets the stage with this powerful command. He tells Israel, look, don't live like the culture you just came from in Egypt, and don't adopt the ways of the culture you're going to in Canaan. You are going to be different. This is a call to be a distinct people, a kind of counterculture, set apart not just by how they worshipped, but by their entire way of life.
The chapter then lays out this different standard, focusing heavily on family and sexual ethics. It forbids a long list of incestuous relationships, it explicitly prohibits the horrific practice of child sacrifice that was common in the region, and it condemns other acts like adultery and bestiality. The idea was that God's holiness was meant to shape the most intimate and foundational relationships inside the community.
And so when you put it all together, from the rules about skin diseases to the Day of Atonement to sexual ethics, what you get is this comprehensive framework for holiness. These laws taught ancient Israel a profound truth. Every single part of their lives mattered to the God who had chosen to live right there among them. Their health, their worship, their food, and their families were all places where they could live out their unique calling to be a holy people.
And this leaves us with one final question to think about. These texts are thousands of years old, written for a very specific people in a specific time. But the deep ideas they introduce, ideas of holiness, of what it means to be set apart, of our human need for atonement and reconciliation, these are incredibly powerful concepts. So the question for us today is, how do these ancient ideas continue to echo and shape our world, our understanding of community, justice, and even our own spirituality? It's definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks for joining me on this journey through Leviticus.